4 bright young lives, full of dreams and promise, ended in a single night. The quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho, was plunged into fear and heartbreak as the unimaginable unfolded inside an off-campus home. A knife, a suspect, and a DNA match, pieces of a puzzle that baffled investigators and gripped the nation. Who could commit such a heinous act? And why? This is the chilling story of the Idaho student murders, a case that shocked America and left a small community searching for answers. Stay with us as we unravel the clues, the investigation, and the twists that brought criminology student Brian Kohberger into the spotlight. Was it random, or was it calculated? What happened that night inside the King Road house? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. November 13th, 2022. What began as a quiet Sunday morning in Moscow, Idaho, turned into a nightmare that made national headlines. 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were found brutally stabbed to death in their off-campus home on King Road. The tragedy stunned the tight-knit college town and left a nation demanding answers. Kaylee and Madison were more than roommates. They were childhood best friends, inseparable through thick and thin. Xana and Ethan, a loving couple, brought laughter and light wherever they went. Together, they were the heart of a vibrant social circle, united by their shared dreams of a bright future. But what makes this case so haunting isn't just the brutality of the crime, it's the mystery. For weeks, investigators were left with little to go on. No apparent motive, no immediate suspects. Then, in an unexpected twist, attention turned to Brian Kohberger, a PhD student in criminology, a man who studied crime itself. How could someone with such a background become a suspect in a case this horrific? A small-town tragedy, a shocking profile, and unanswered questions. This is why the Idaho student murders remain etched in the public's mind. What drove such an act of violence? And was justice truly on its way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Before the tragic events of November 13th, 2022, life in Moscow, Idaho, was peaceful, a small, picturesque town where violent crime was almost unheard of. Nestled in the rolling hills of the Palouse region, it was the perfect backdrop for students seeking an idyllic college experience. That serenity was shattered in the blink of an eye, leaving a community forever changed. To understand the gravity of this loss, we must first get to know the 4 young lives that were stolen. Kaylee Goncalves was full of energy, always making plans for the future. She was set to graduate early and had just bought a new car to celebrate her hard work. Madison Mogen, her best friend since childhood, shared her love of adventure and ambition. The two were inseparable, their bond more like sisters than friends. Xana Kernodle, a junior at the university, was known for her witty personality and a smile that lit up every room. Her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, was a triplet and a natural-born optimist who loved spending time with his family and friends. Together, they were the epitome of youth, joy, and possibility. On the night of November 12, 2022, everything seemed normal. Kaylee and Madison spent their evening at a local bar, enjoying the company of friends before picking up some late-night food from a nearby truck. Xana and Ethan attended a fraternity party, laughing and dancing the night away. By 2 a.m., all 4 had returned to their shared rental home on King Road, settling in for what should have been an ordinary night. 2 other roommates were also in the house that night, young women who shared the home with the victims. They went to bed unaware of the horror that would unfold just hours later. By morning, the quiet house on King Road had become a crime scene. At 11:58 a.m., a 911 call was placed after one of the surviving roommates discovered something was terribly wrong. The details of that call remain shrouded in mystery, but it marked the beginning of a case that would grip the nation. How could such a heinous act happen without anyone hearing or seeing a thing? And why would someone target these 4 students? As investigators pieced together the timeline, the questions only deepened. What do you think happened that night? Share your thoughts in the comments below. It was just past 2 a.m. on November 13th, 2022, when the last lights went out inside the house at 1122 King Road. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin had all returned home after an ordinary night out with friends. The rental home, situated in a quiet neighborhood near the University of Idaho, should have been a safe haven. But before dawn, it became the scene of a crime so horrifying that it would leave an entire nation grappling for answers. According to investigators, the killer entered the house through an unlocked sliding glass door at the back. This entrance led directly into the second level, bypassing the front door entirely. The layout of the home, a 3-story structure with bedrooms on different levels, may have played a critical role in how the crime unfolded. The killer moved with a level of precision that suggested familiarity with the environment or, perhaps, chilling determination. Forensic evidence revealed the use of a fixed-blade knife, likely a K-bar combat knife, a weapon designed for close-quarters combat and capable of inflicting devastating injuries. Investigators believe the killer first targeted Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves, who were asleep in the same bed on the 3rd floor. Both young women sustained multiple stab wounds, and the ferocity of the attack suggested a personal or deeply motivated crime. The killer then moved to the 2nd floor, where Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin were staying. Xana, according to autopsy findings, fought back, sustaining defensive wounds, indicating she awoke during the attack. Her boyfriend, Ethan, was also found stabbed multiple times. What makes this crime even more perplexing is the eerie silence that surrounded it. The surviving roommates, located on the 1st floor, reported hearing little more than a faint thud during the night. They assumed it was one of their housemates and went back to sleep, unaware of the horror unfolding just above them. By morning, the house had fallen deathly quiet. At 11:58 a.m., one of the surviving roommates placed a 911 call after discovering something was wrong. The details of that call remain sealed, but reports indicate that the caller described an unconscious person. When police arrived minutes later, they walked into a scene of unimaginable carnage. Blood evidence, described by officials as significant, was visible outside the home, seeping onto the foundation. The scene was chaotic yet methodical, a signature that would puzzle investigators for weeks. One crucial discovery would later become a turning point in the investigation: a leather knife sheath found near Madison Mogen's body on the 3rd floor. The sheath bore the unmistakable logo of a K-bar combat knife and carried traces of DNA. This single item would eventually lead investigators to their prime suspect, but at the time, it raised more questions than answers. News of the murders quickly spread through Moscow and beyond. For a town of just 25,000 people, this was unthinkable. Moscow had reported no homicides in 7 years. Now, parents were rushing to bring their children home, and students who remained on campus avoided walking alone. The once friendly college town was gripped by fear. The crime also caught the attention of the national media. Speculation swirled as experts and armchair detectives debated theories online. Was this the act of a deranged stranger, or was it someone the victims knew? And why would the killer bypass the 2 surviving roommates entirely? For weeks, the house at 1122 King Road stood as a silent witness to the crime. Law enforcement worked tirelessly, combing through evidence and following leads. But the case seemed to grow colder by the day. As the town mourned, investigators knew they needed a breakthrough. Little did they know, the answers they sought would come from an unexpected source, and the case was about to take a shocking turn. As we continue this story, do well to subscribe to our channel to encourage us to keep bringing you stories based on true events. After the brutal murders at 1122 King Road, investigators were faced with a chilling reality. They had almost no clues to work with. The case seemed impossible to crack. The lack of a clear motive, no signs of forced entry, and the absence of witnesses left law enforcement scrambling. As weeks passed, The fear gripping the community intensified. The pressure to solve the case mounted, and every lead seemed to go cold. Despite these challenges, law enforcement wasn't giving up. In the early days of the investigation, the focus shifted to the crime scene itself. The forensic team scoured the house for any potential evidence that could point to the killer's identity. It wasn't until one of the officers found a critical piece of evidence, buried in the chaos, that the case began to turn. On the floor next to Madison Mogen's body, police discovered a leather knife sheath. The sheath was unassuming, yet it carried a distinct logo, a symbol associated with Kohberger knives, a military-grade weapon. What made it even more significant was that it contained DNA that would later be linked to the killer. This single clue set the investigation on a new path. At the same time, investigators began combing through surveillance footage from nearby areas, hoping to catch a glimpse of the killer. That's when a white Hyundai Elantra, seen in the vicinity of the house around the time of the murders, caught their attention. Security cameras had captured it driving through Moscow streets, and this vehicle became a key lead. The car's presence near the crime scene raised alarms. Officers began searching for a connection to the vehicle, but they needed more evidence to make the leap from a suspect car to a suspect person. This is where modern technology stepped in. Investigators used cell phone data to track movements in the area, correlating pings with the timing of the crime. They pieced together a picture of someone moving through Moscow, getting closer to the crime scene. It wasn't long before the focus turned to Brian Kohberger, a criminology PhD student at Washington State University. Kohberger's academic background in criminal justice initially made him an unlikely suspect. But as law enforcement dug deeper, they discovered troubling behavioral shifts in his life after the murders. He had been living just across the state line near Pullman, Washington, and his behavior had become increasingly erratic following the killings. Friends and colleagues noted a shift in his demeanor, and his interactions began to raise red flags. Kohberger had previously worked as a teaching assistant, studying criminal behavior, but his growing sense of discomfort and change in his actions made some question whether he knew more about criminal investigations than he let on. Then the breakthrough came. Kohberger's white Hyundai Elantra was identified as matching the vehicle seen near the crime scene. When investigators pulled his DNA from the sheath found at the crime scene, the evidence was undeniable. It was a match. Suddenly, the promising criminology student, the one who studied criminal behavior, became the prime suspect in one of the most shocking crimes of the decade. But how did a promising academic become a potential killer? What turned Brian Kohberger from a student of crime to a suspect in one of the most gruesome murders the country had seen in years? And with such a strong connection to the crime, how could Kohberger possibly defend himself? Stay with us as we dive deeper into the chilling twists of this investigation. On December 30th, 2022, over a month after the horrifying murders at 1122 King Road, a major breakthrough was announced. Law enforcement arrested Brian Kohberger, a 28-year-old criminology PhD student, at his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. The arrest came as a shock, not just for the public, but for those who knew Kohberger as a quiet, academically driven individual. But how did investigators connect him to one of the most haunting crimes in recent history? The chain of evidence, though complex, pointed straight to Kohberger. It began with the white Hyundai Elantra. Surveillance footage had captured a vehicle of the same make and model near the King Road house around the time of the murders. Investigators traced this lead across states, eventually linking the car to Kohberger, who was attending Washington State University, less than 10 miles from Moscow, Idaho. Then there was the cell phone data. By analyzing pings from nearby towers, detectives uncovered a pattern. Kohberger's phone had been in the vicinity of the victim's house on multiple occasions in the weeks leading up to the murders. This wasn't just a chance occurrence. It suggested a level of premeditation that raised even more questions. But the most damning piece of evidence was the DNA match. The knife sheath left behind at the crime scene contained a single trace of DNA. That sample was eventually linked to Kohberger through genetic genealogy, and a direct match obtained from trash collected at his family's home. For investigators, this was the smoking gun. News of Kohberger's arrest spread rapidly, drawing widespread public reaction. For many, it was a moment of relief, a sense that justice might finally be within reach. But for the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, it was only the beginning of a long road. Questions lingered. Why had Kohberger allegedly targeted these 4 students? Was there a deeper connection? And how could someone with his background, a student of criminal behavior, commit such a crime? As the community sought answers, Kohberger faced his first court appearance. Standing before the judge, he maintained his innocence, pleading not guilty to all charges. The public, meanwhile, remained divided. Was this an airtight case, or would there be more twists to come? For the families, the arrest marked a step closer to justice. But as the trial loomed, the pain of losing their loved ones remained as raw as ever. The question now was no longer who but why. And would the full truth ever come to light? The arrest of Bryan Kohberger on December 30th, 2022, was the culmination of weeks of painstaking work by law enforcement. For over a month, the community of Moscow, Idaho, and the families of the victims had lived in fear and uncertainty. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, not in Idaho, but across the country, in a quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood where Kohberger had returned to spend the holidays with his family. At around 3:00 a.m., tactical teams surrounded the Kohberger residence in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Using a no-knock warrant, they entered the home and took Bryan Kohberger into custody without incident. Neighbors later described waking up to the sound of police sirens and flashing lights, shocked to learn that the suspect in one of the nation's most high-profile murder cases had been living among them. So, how did law enforcement connect a criminology PhD student to such a brutal crime? The trail of evidence began with the white Hyundai Elantra. Surveillance cameras in Moscow had captured the vehicle circling the area near the King Roadhouse several times on the night of the murders. It was an unusual pattern, raising suspicions that the driver might have been scoping out the property. This clue led police to issue a nationwide search for the vehicle, scrutinizing registrations across multiple states. The break came when investigators tied the car to Bryan Kohberger, a student at Washington State University, located just across the state line in Pullman, Washington. But the car alone wasn't enough to make an arrest. Detectives turned to cell phone data, using tower pings to analyze movements in and around Moscow. What they found was alarming. Kohberger's phone had been in the vicinity of the King Roadhouse on at least 12 separate occasions in the weeks leading up to the murders. Most of these visits occurred late at night or in the early morning hours, suggesting a pattern of surveillance or stalking. Crucially, on the night of the murders, Kohberger's phone appeared to be turned off, a tactic often used to avoid detection. When the phone came back online, it was miles away from the crime scene, heading back toward Pullman. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, investigators turned their attention to the knife sheath found at the crime scene. This single item, overlooked by the killer, would prove to be the most significant piece of evidence. The sheath, embossed with the K-Bar logo, carried a trace of DNA on the snap closure. Using cutting-edge genetic genealogy, detectives identified a familial match to Bryan Kohberger. To confirm this, they collected trash from the Kohberger family residence in Pennsylvania, obtaining a direct match to the DNA from the sheath. This was the smoking gun investigators had been waiting for. On the day of his arrest, Kohberger was transported to a local facility in Pennsylvania before being extradited to Idaho. As news of his capture spread, the public reaction was swift and intense. Some expressed relief that a suspect had been identified, while others struggled to reconcile the idea of a criminology student, a person dedicated to studying the justice system, allegedly committing such a heinous crime. Friends, former classmates, and colleagues of Kohberger began to come forward, painting a complex picture of the man now accused of murder. He was described as highly intelligent but socially awkward, someone who had struggled with bullying in his youth. Over the years, his fascination with crime appeared to deepen. He had even posted online, asking criminals to describe their thought processes during the commission of crimes, a detail that, in hindsight, took on a chilling new significance. At his initial court appearance, Kohberger was composed, but pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense team quickly challenged the evidence, arguing that the DNA match was circumstantial and that the case lacked a clear motive. Meanwhile, the families of the victims watched from the gallery, their grief and determination evident. For them, the arrest was a step forward, but far from closure. They wanted answers. Why these 4 students? Was it random, or had Kohberger targeted them deliberately? As investigators pieced together more details, they revealed that Kohberger may have been following some of the victims on social media, raising questions about whether this crime was premeditated. Yet many aspects of the case remain shrouded in mystery. What drove Brian Kohberger to allegedly commit such a horrific act? And how could someone with a background in criminology, a person trained to understand the psychology of crime, become a suspect in one of the most gruesome murder cases of the decade? For the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, the road to justice remains long and painful. The arrest brought them closer to answers, but the trial ahead will likely be grueling, filled with legal challenges and emotional trauma. As the case unfolds, the public watches closely, hoping for a resolution that honors the lives lost on that quiet November night. With Brian Kohberger in custody, the legal battle began, a journey that would be just as fraught as the investigation itself. At his initial court appearance in Idaho, Kohberger pleaded not guilty to all charges, setting the stage for what promises to be a long and highly scrutinized trial. From the start, his defense team mounted challenges to the prosecution's evidence. They questioned the reliability of the DNA match, arguing that a single trace found on the knife sheath was insufficient to definitively place Kohberger at the scene of the crime. They also raised concerns about the cell phone data, suggesting it could be circumstantial and fail to prove intent or direct involvement. Complicating matters further were the pretrial motions and delays. Kohberger's attorneys filed motions to challenge the admissibility of key evidence and raised concerns about finding an impartial jury in Loudoun County, given the intense media coverage and public interest in the case. In response, the court approved a change of venue, moving the trial to Boise, Idaho, over 300 miles away, in an attempt to ensure a fair and unbiased proceeding. For the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, the legal process has been agonizing. Each court date, each motion filed, brings them closer to a resolution, yet the weight of their loss remains immeasurable. They've attended vigils, spoken out in interviews, and kept their loved ones' memories alive, all while waiting for justice to be served. The case has left the community of Moscow grappling with questions that still lack clear answers. What led Kohberger, a criminology student seemingly on the path to a promising career, to allegedly target these 4 students? Was this crime planned or an act of impulse? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, why these victims? As the trial looms, the significance of this case extends beyond the courtroom. For the families, it's about finding closure and ensuring justice for their children. For the community, it's about restoring a sense of safety and trust. And for the nation, it's a chilling reminder of how quickly a sense of normalcy can be shattered. The answers may come in court, or they may remain forever elusive. But one thing is certain, the memory of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan will not fade. As their families and friends continue to seek justice, the world watches and waits for the truth to finally be revealed. 4 young lives, full of promise, stolen in an instant. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were more than just names. They were daughters, sons, friends, and classmates, with dreams and futures that can never be fulfilled. As the trial approaches, the search for justice presses on, Yet for the families of the victims, the pain remains, a wound that time alone cannot heal. The house on King Road, once filled with laughter and life, now stands as a haunting reminder of the tragedy. The unanswered questions linger. What truly happened on that fateful night? And will the trial bring the answers everyone has been waiting for? Or will some mysteries remain forever unsolved? We want to hear from you. What do you think happened that night on King Road? Will the evidence presented in court be enough to provide clarity? Or are there pieces of the puzzle still missing? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification button as we bring you the conclusion of this case. For now, stay tuned for more true crime investigations like this one. Together, let's honor the memory of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, and ensure their story is never forgotten.